Hi, everyone. This is Joe Firestone for Empowering Democracy. And our topic for tonight is Dump the Corruption Presentation, Part 2, Part 2. So I'm trying to notice where I left off last time. I think it was here. Uh, I've been discussing the advantages of the Dump the Corruption campaign. So let me continue to do that. Let me get the right presentation here. Oh, I think I'm being joined by either Dolores or Greg Mallard. Dolores Pierce. Let me let them in. It is Greg.
Quack, quack.
Hello, Greg.
Howdy.
Howdy is right. Howdy. Do a lot of people in Georgia say howdy?
A few.
Howdy, Kay.
That's because I'm a backwoods country bumpkin.
Yeah, just an old country lawyer, huh?
I'm far from a lawyer.
Yeah, remember Sam Ervin? Back at the time of Nixon's impeachment?
I wasn't around during the Nixon administration.
I know, but there's such a thing as history, Greg.
Yeah, I heard about all that from the Watergate scandal.
Okay, anyway, Sam Ervin used to come into that and always say, I'm just an old country lawyer, but. And then he'd skewer somebody. He was really good. So I think last time we stopped at slide 17. We were talking about the advantages. Let me say first, before I go on with this, that we just had a great meeting with the Elections Committee of the Green Party of New Jersey. It was a very enthusiastic meeting. It was a very friendly meeting. And they suggested all of us coming together to talk about the details of how we could socialize this campaign. And they pointed out would be necessary to standardize certain things like the basic elements of the dump the corruptions method. Okay, so that everybody was running on it. So the promise there, of course, is that the Green Party of New Jersey
Is on board.
is perhaps on board and may help with socializing all their candidates so that every one of them runs on dump the corruption as the primary issue. Okay, so like I'm really high right now, thinking about the possibilities of that.
And thank you, Madeline Hoffman, for pulling those strings.
Thank you, Madeline Hoffman, for arranging the whole thing and for supporting it. Yeah, Madeline uh, will also continue to help us to get this started for some time, and will likely do it also when
And
she.
before I forget, hi Kay, hi Robert, and if Steve Wolf Brand is here, hi Steve.
Hi, Steve. Hi, Robert. Okay, going on with the advantages, bringing new ideas in. Since hashtag dumping the corruption will result in much higher turnover in both the House and the Senate, it will result in more rapid circulation of elites than we have now, increasing the level of democracy in the Congress and the likelihood that new ideas will surface there. More people will run for Congress since incumbency will no longer provide the advantage it does now, increasing the likelihood that new ideas will appear, and other things being equal, that Congress will be better at problem solving and more adaptive to change. The US has been the world's maladaptive giant. We can end that right now with our Dump the Incumbents campaign. I'm sorry, our Dump the Corruption campaign. Gotta watch that. Gotta watch that. I can't regress back to Dump the Incumbents. Anyway, this is a graphic that was contributed by Jimmy Sunderland. And of course, you have uh, the lady who is dumping Nancy Pelosi and Joe Manchin into the bucket. She's washing windows and dumping them into the bucket. I really like this. Particularly,
That's hilarious.
that was hilarious, wasn't it? Show it again.
Yeah. They should have also put Kirsten Sinema's face in there as well.
Yeah, but this is really a great idea of Jimmy's. I think. Putting that in.
Now you have, and I just saw in the news, and before we go into the slides, Carrie Lake has expressed that she may run for U.S. Senate in Arizona. So that's two very unpopular people, Kirsten Sinema and Carrie Lake, running.
Yes, it is. I think for the Democrats, it will probably be Ruben Gallego, okay, who will be opposing both of them. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how that turns out.
And they're going to go to a winner-take-all system for the next election there. Instead of a 50% plus one vote, it's going to be a winner-take-all system, I'm hearing.
I'm sorry, a winner-take-all system in what context?
Where the person with the most votes wins.
But isn't that what happens now?
Not in some states. Some states
it's
got to be
I see.
50%
Some states
plus one vote.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Rather than 50 plus one requirement, it will be okay to have a plurality and still win.
And what we really need is we need ranked choice voting.
Yes, I know. That's part of what we're saying here. What we're calling for here is ranked choice voting. But it's part of what we assume.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we mentioned it earlier, didn't we? Let's go back and check. sort of double check before we got to the disadvantages and objections. Before we got to the new ideas.
Oh, by the way, my show targeting the Georgia reps kind of angered a few folks.
Oh, did it?
Oh, yeah.
Good. Who got angry?
Well, some Democrats from here in Georgia. Is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is. You expected that anyway, didn't you?
Oh yeah, I really didn't care either. I honestly didn't care if I made them mad or not.
Oh, I know that.
Like, I'm the type of person that really don't care if they get mad with me or not.
I know because you're a fighter.
Mm-hmm.
Disadvantages and objections, and over the years you developed a thick skin. Here are the disadvantages, okay, and objections. Some people will say that if they follow dump the corruption, we'll be defeating some legislators who don't take the big donor money because there are going to be some errors. In other words, the voters won't know who's really taking the big donor money and who's not. So we'll be defeating some legislators who aren't taking big money. Okay, second objection is we're cutting short the careers of good congressmen and senators who do take money from wealthy donors but who are unbought. Third objection, we'll be throwing expertise out along with the people who have it. Fourth, leadership teams are disrupted, making it harder for us to do things. That is because we're dumping the corruption. We're going to be disrupting the leadership teams, and that will make it harder to get things through the Congress. Okay, next, this is not going to work to bring change because close to equal numbers of both parties will be defeated. So party gridlock is going to remain. Okay, next, it won't work because too many voters will be afraid to take the risk of making the situation even worse. And finally, it won't work because it's electoralism, and electoralism never works. So let's take these one by one. So defeating incumbents who don't take big money. Yes, some incumbents may fall due to error, but we can try to minimize these losses by publishing a weekly list of those who don't take big donor money at the official hashtag Dump the Corruption website. And the website will also report on attempts to provide misinformation about incumbents and other candidates, because you can pretty well predict that as our campaign gets going, people who are fighting for office are going to make claims about their opponents which are false, claiming that they take big money when they don't take big money. We're going to get a lot of that and a lot of arguments about that. And so our website's going to have to keep up with that. Okay. Then there's the objection of, well, we be defeating legislators who are unbought even though they're taking big money. Or in more detail, using the general rule of voting against candidates will defeat some members who do take money from big donors, but still don't appear to vote for the interests of those donors. It is unavoidable that this will happen sometimes, but all these incumbents have to do to defend themselves is to stop taking the big money. I mean, it's easy. If people are taking donor money, there will always be a tendency for that money to influence them. Quote, men are not saints, unquote. We cannot trust that what did not corrupt them yesterday will not corrupt them today. And finally, the goal here is to get money out of politics. We can't sacrifice that goal to accommodate the few congressmen who may be saints. For example, Ro Khanna. Okay, Ro Khanna takes a lot of big money. Okay, now maybe Ro Khanna's a saint and he's never influenced by the big money. But even if that were true, which I doubt, there are very few Congress people who are saints. And so we just got to look at the money as the litmus test. Do they take it or not? So then there's the issue of throwing experts and their expertise out of Congress. Some will insist that using the general rule of dumping the corruption will remove critical legislative skills from Congress that will prevent it from producing good legislation. Now, there may be a degradation of legislative skill if the rule is followed. But what is this skill used for now? Bottling up legislation in committee? Writing overly complex legislation that voters don't understand, like these 2,300-page bills, 4,000-page bills that we sometimes get? Why do we need expertise for doing that? Let Congress write single-issue bills and pass single-issue bills written in plain language. Then there's also the skill of using nifty parliamentary maneuvers to protect members from accountability by giving them legislative fig leaves. Fig leaves, sorry. So, yeah, that's what they do. That's what Chuck Schumer's doing all the time. That's what he's doing all the time. Why did he remove the $15 an hour part, okay, of the American Rescue Plan Act? He removed that when he put the legislation coming over from the House onto the floor of the Senate. Why did he do that? Because he knew Manchin and Sinema were going to oppose it, and he didn't want to he wanted to protect them. So he didn't want them to directly say no. So Bernie Sanders responded by trying to pass an amendment to get the $15 an hour back in. And so they voted no on the amendment, but they didn't have to vote no on the direct measure that contained the $15 an hour legislation. They didn't want to do that because then they would be voting against the $1,400 checks that people were supposed to be getting, you see, because that was part of the American Rescue Plan bill. So he protected them that way. So the Republicans couldn't run ads against them saying they voted against the $1,400 checks. So he protected them and he hurt the rest of us. Of course, some skill is needed, but the willingness to legislate for the people is much more important than some skills that we may lose. So, disruption of leadership teams. Some will criticize using the general rule on grounds that it will disrupt the leadership in Congress. The most general reply to that is that disrupting leadership blocks and structures is a feature of the general rule. It's not a bug. The results that congressional leaders have produced over these 40 years have been terrible. They have presided over the worst decline in equality in our history. They have presided over the worst accumulation of unsolved societal problems since the period before the Civil War. So disruption and replacement of these leadership teams is actually what we're after. That is something we favor, not something that we oppose. And here's a graphic what things were like before the Civil War. These were all big problems, the problems of slavery, okay, of union busting, uh, and the problems of governments marching in to shoot down strikers. Those were all problems that to some degree got resolved after the Civil War. Of course, we're returning to some of these problems right now because of the dominance of the superiority of the market and the superiority of capitalism, which we're getting through the mainstream media. That's creating, okay, an environment which is supporting anti-strike movements and even in some quarters pro-slavery movements. And of course, very often in strikes, okay, the police are supporting the companies and not the strikers. And that's still going on here in the United States, of course. Here's another graphic that's pointing to the problem of gridlock, the parties having gridlock. There's Gridlock Street, and there is Government Street. And you've got this sign pointing towards Gridlock Street to represent the problems we have in our legislature, in our legislatures, including our legislature and Congress. Again, some say dump the corruption won't work because too many will fear making the situation worse. This arises out of specific choices that people must make. Two major party non-incumbents running in a primary taking big money. What do? You vote for the non-incumbent taking the least amount, okay, of big money. Of course, if you can, you vote for a non-incumbent who isn't taking any big money, which would be the case if the litmus test is faithfully applied by people. Anyway, when two major incumbents running in a primary are taking big money, then what we ought to be doing is dumping both incumbents. If a non-incumbent not taking big money, okay, is running. If no non-incumbent is running, then you vote for the incumbent taking the least amount, okay, of big money. If there's one major party incumbent and one major party candidate taking big money, vote for a third party candidate not taking big money. If there's no third party candidate, then vote for a non-incumbent that is taking the least amount of money. So that's specific voting advice that won't make the situation any worse. And there's the objection, it won't work because of electoralism. The argument against that is relying on electoralism doesn't work, since when we look at history, we see that every significant change is motivated by movements and collective direct action of various kinds. So we think electoralism does work in some contexts, but not in others. For example, electoralism supplemented by direct action has worked all over Western and Northern Europe, in Canada, in Australia, in New Zealand, to produce strong social safety nets and welfare states with much greater economic equality and happiness than in the United States. The reason electoralism has been largely ineffective in the United States is because the conditions for its success, mass movements using frequent direct action, strong unions, fair, unrigged elections, much greater levels of equality, and legislatures that legislate for the people have been undermined by the power of money in politics. So we have to bring back the conditions that underpin electoralism that produces legislation benefiting people. We do that through mass movements demanding different forms of justice using a variety of direct actions ranging from minor protest actions to general strikes. The key here is to increasingly disrupt economic systems that work for the wealthy, but not for anyone else, while aligning with and restoring unions. But second, to make electoralism work, we need to bring mass movements and direct action to the election system itself. That's what hashtag dump the corruption will do. It is not electoralism. It is bringing direct action to the election system itself. We have to remember that electoralism is the idea that what we have to do to make change in the interest of the people is for each of us to register and vote for a candidate who has a good chance to win and whose views and policy agendas are most in line with ours. That if we do that in each election, all will be well for both our nation and ourselves. Hashtag dump the corruption does not assume that. Instead, it assumes that the electoral system won't work to produce such results because it has been corrupted by money and now works to re-elect incumbents who will do the donors' bidding rather than the people's bidding. Hashtag dump the corruption is direct action against such a system designed to disrupt the flow of money to candidates and its influence over them being the candidates. Being the candidates. And our conclusion, dump the corruption is not about pursuing electoralism. It is about disrupting electoralism by getting people to vote against big money in politics, by firing all the legislators and other candidates who take that money. It is about making that money and its influence over incumbents toxic to both incumbents, and to big money challengers, so that money will be driven out of politics by voters to be replaced by the demands of people expressed through mass movements, protest activities, general strikes, unions, alternative media, and people's pressure campaigns on legislators across the board. It is about creating the primacy of bottom-up politics in America and the end of political oligarchy. It is the general strike of voters against money in politics. So that's the conclusion. That's the last part of it. So what do you think, Greg?
Bang up job. I agree with all of the points there. And we do, like we were discussing in one of the other shows, we do need to address both the weaknesses, and we also need to also be looking at our strengths as well. We need to be paying attention to all of that in what we spot in all this. And that's one thing that there's gonna be a time where we are looking at the weaknesses, we're looking at the strengths. And the strengths, I believe, are the candidates we do get elected. And the weaknesses that I have to point out is the races we do not win and what we need to learn from and work on toward the issues facing working class families. And that's one thing we're going to have to be very vigilant and on our toes about. And the weaknesses could also be a strength in what we can learn to go off of in a future election. So there's always that. And that's just what we need to be looking for as time progresses. We need to be paying attention very closely to the detail.
Yes, we do. And that was some of what we were talking about at the session with the Green Party we had today.
I would love for all of us that have been involved with putting this together and have been working together. I would love for all of us to meet on a Zoom call at a later date.
Yeah, so would I. And the people from the Green Party who were on this call were generally favorable to the dump the corruption idea. And there are at least two of them, okay, and Madeline, and maybe there will be more, who want to join, okay, in this effort, okay, and they are willing, if we invite them to Zoom calls, they will come, will participate with us, and they're also interested in joining as panelists in some of our discussions as we go forward. And they're also interested in standardizing the dump the corruption idea as the first issue, the priority issue of any campaign that the Green Party people and voters, okay, can organize around.
And I also believe in these talks and these discussions, it will strengthen our movement's resolve as well going forward, because then they can really get the message. And it's going to have to come down to the messaging to the voters that if you want these things, the first thing we have to do, like Medicare for all, federal job guarantee, and so forth, the first thing that we have to do is to dump the corruption in politics, and that is to get rid of the big money that is plaguing our election cycles each year. That's the bottom of the agenda that we need to tackle first in order to, and that's the thing that I've been saying since I started with this and telling people locally that if you're going to have the things you want in government, and you want a government that is of, by, and for the people, then you're going to have to dump the corruption, which means and I even talked to them about the litmus test, and they are actually on board. And I've actually have been talking in Facebook groups in local areas and talking to people in person about this. And I've got local support behind this. And I've been doing this in person.
When I was talking to the Green Party people earlier today, I made the point that when you talk to voters, that you can ask them some questions like, for example, if you see people running for a particular office and they're taking big money from donors, and you or someone you know is running in that campaign, and he or she is not taking any of the big money, Who do you suppose the candidates taking the big money are going to represent? Are they going to be your representative, or are they going to be the donor representative? And who do they think that your friend who is not taking any of the big money is going to represent? Are they going to represent the donors, or are they going to represent you? I think you have to have people asking that question of themselves. Then they have to ask, do you want a representative or not? If you want a representative, if you believe in representative government and you personally want to have a representative, then you have to vote for someone who's not going to represent the donors, but who's going to represent you, and who won't have any divided loyalties, because they're not taking any money from the big donors. They will have to turn to you for their power.
I would, if I were to run for office, I would be asking the voters as a candidate, and this is strictly from a candidate's point of view, of course. Do you want a representative who works for you and listens to your concerns? Or do you want a candidate that does not care about you and only works for their corporate interests? Do you want somebody that will come to your community, talk with you about the issues? Or would you rather somebody who doesn't care about you, that is bought by Wall Street or any other special interest groups representing you? The choice is yours. You either have somebody here that genuinely cares,
companies,
or you have somebody that only cares for their corporate donors.
Yep. That's the question people have to be asked.
And I would even ask that from the people that I'm running for office for. I'd say, do you want somebody that is going to not come to town and talk to you or hold events with you? Or do you want somebody that just abandons you?
Right. But often the choice is not so stark. For example, a few years back when I lived in Alexandria, I had a representative who seemed like a really regular guy who cared about people. He had town halls and he came to the people. At the same time, he was taking big money from donors. Guess what? He wasn't for Medicare for all. He was for some version of the public option. And he showed up to one of his town halls with Howard Dean as
Oh God, Howard Dean.
His guest. Okay, and that town hall was at the height of the struggle in 2009 for healthcare reform. And Howard Dean and he were for the public option. They were not for Medicare for all. The town hall meeting was swamped. There were Democratic Socialists there. There were Progressive Democrats for America there. There were these right-wing anti-abortion groups there. In fact, one of their famous leaders was there, basically disrupting the meeting. The Washington Post had somebody covering this meeting. I mean, the meeting was a real big deal. But basically, this amounted to a case where a congressman who was a regular guy and who had represented people for some time and who was apparently very friendly to people would not support Medicare for all, even though a majority of his district, according to polling, wanted Medicare for all. And instead, he was trying to palm off the public option onto people.
And nobody wants the public option anymore. People won't. I think what has happened in that aspect, and this goes to what Bernie Sanders did with his campaigning, is he went and talked to people and told them that, hey, we need to catch up with the rest of the major industrialized world, since we are the only major industrialized country that does not guarantee healthcare as a human right to all citizens. And there's increasing support for Medicare for all. There's a wide range of support for a federal job guarantee. There's a lot of people that are in favor of total medical debt elimination, total student loan debt elimination, a living wage standard, which does need to be adopted. Instead of a minimum wage requirement, we need a living wage standard requirement. And in all my mathematical figuring on Medicare for all, I found that let's say a company has 50 employees. They're taking $20,000 per year per employee. That's $1 million per year that small business is having to fork out for healthcare expenditures. You take and you pass Medicare for all. That company that employs that same 50 people, they could take and do two things that would be very beneficial to the economy. The two things they could do would be give their current, let's say their current employees are making let's say $70,000 a year. You take those 50 employees and you pay them $75,000 per year. And then you take the remaining money and you hire more workers to come work for that company. And it also lowers the unemployment rate by at least 20 to 25% from what I figured. I've did a whole mathematical figure. Let's say the unemployment number is, I'm just going to throw out a number. Let's say the current unemployment number right now is at 3.6%.
Yep.
It would cut the unemployment rate down to at least 2.7 to 2.85%.
Greg, it might be lower than that. Okay, because
and that's just from my figures and what I've guesstimated.
When you guesstimated, did you take into account the people they consider to be out of the workforce,
Mm-hmm.
who would be tickled to have jobs?
Yep.
How did you get those numbers?
I just threw out numbers and everything, just doing math in my head, just one night. Late. It's like one of those late night thinking scenarios. And that's just what I was putting out there, just putting in my head. And Medicare for all would be a bailout for small businesses.
Oh, yes, it would be a bailout for small businesses.
It would, and also it would be a bailout to state governments as well, because the state governments are no longer having to cover Medicaid services. So that's in the Medicare for all. And you would think that these Republican-led state legislatures would support something like that, a Medicare for all system.
Yeah,
especially Republican governors that want to save money on the state budgets.
Yeah, but they're not interested in that. They're too much interested in the ideology.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and they ideologically oppose that. That's what's that about. Okay, a few years back, I was working with the idea, okay, of disemployment, which you could estimate by taking the U3 six figures, okay, and the U six figures, and then also looking at the potential for employment. Okay? In other words, looking at uh, the total number of people in the workforce.
Yes, I did, Robert. I took into consideration for that as well, that it would add a lot of money to the employers, like your company's budgets, to allow those part-time workers to also become full-time workers. And Medicare for all is the will be a deflationary event as well. And I would also like to conduct an analysis on how much outstand. I would like to see a figure on the outstanding medical debt that's in the U.S. currently as well, to
Oh, I
see
don't
how
know.
much.
I've seen that recently somewhere. I think that's probably searchable.
And then see, and if you wipe away that medical debt, that would also add money to the nation's GDP. Just like total student loan debt elimination, when Stephanie Kelton, I think this was back a few years back,
Yes, it was. It was in 19. I'm sorry, 2017 or 2018 that they
she
completed.
said at the time that student loan debt would add, I think this was either 2017, 2018. She said it would add over 1.8 trillion to the nation's GDP over the next 10 years. And plus, you got to think, when you wipe out that medical debt, people have more money in buying power, so they can, and that would also tackle the unemployment crisis as well, and maybe lower that unemployment figure that I threw out there much lower.
Right, and similar things would happen if there was a jubilee in the medical debt area. Uh, we need 150 Kashama salons. Yeah, I completely agree. We need 150 Kashama salons. Sandy Desk says, hi, Kay, Steve, Robert, Greg, Joe, and Bonnie. And Robert Copeland says, Kashama is forming a new labor campaign called Workers Strike Back. And Robert also mentions that he's heard that she's not going to run again for Seattle City Council. And Greg says, Kashama is my Shiro.
Yep, she is. Just like Jill Stein is. Like I love Jill Stein, Susan Sarandon, and Kashama Sawant.
That's a pretty good trio there.
Oh
Sandy
yeah.
says, I'm hanging in there. How are you, Greg? And Kay says, back to you, Sandy. Robert Copeland says, the article about Kashama Sawant is in the Seattle Times.
Oh, okay. I saw something right here, and it's from Twitter, and it's about Kashama Sawant, and it's from the Red Berets,
Yeah.
and it says something about support workers strike back. Workers strike back. They received an email from Kashama Sawant's office letting them know that about this organizing effort, the essential work, holding the powerful accountable. We need a mass worker solidarity movement. And I'm going to like and retweet that and also share the tweet in the YouTube chat and also over on the Facebook chat for where to go, what to support, and so forth.
Great.
Yeah, we need to build a in this right here. I think that we can also get a touch of dumping the corruption in with that movement that they're trying to also start as well.
Sure we can.
So we're sitting on a golden opportunity for a movement for dumping the corruption
Yes,
if
we are.
successful.
So Robert says, Sandy, I have never seen a corporation go to jail. I've never seen a corporation exactly go to jail, but there was a corporation that was executed.
And here shortly, I have my 10 p.m. show, so I'm going to have to call it a night with y'all, which my show will be on Morgan McGarvey, Summer Lee, and Delia Ramirez. It's going to be a relatively short show because I'm going off of what I could find. But I'll see y'all over on the Revolution Evolution channel.
Okay, that'll be great. I'll be coming over shortly myself.
So Robert, see y'all later.
Yep. Robert Copeland says, Sandy, I have never seen a corporation go to jail. I haven't seen one go to jail, but I've seen one get the death penalty. Specifically, that happened, to Arthur Andersen, one of the big 5 consulting firms, as a result of the Enron scandal. It was involved in the wrongdoing, of Enron, and the whole corporation actually, it was an LLC, or an LLP. Basically, the whole corporation had to disband, and it was ended. There is no Arthur Andersen today. And Greg Mallett says, ooh, pretty like button. Must click on it. And Robert says, that reminds me, I have a Medicare for All Everywhere meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. Glad you're reminded. Did my red beret remind you? No, it was what Greg said. And did Greg consider part-time workers that want to work 40 hours a week? Sounds like he did. Robert Copeland says a lot of workers will get a pay raise if we had Medicare for all. Absolutely, they would. And by the way, there should be no additional taxes because we should save about 50% over current expenditures. Current expenditures are approaching $4 trillion a year. So we should save $2 trillion a year. I know that the federal government is paying for something like $2.5 trillion out of the $4 trillion because there was a study in 2018 from Himmelstein and Woolhandler that proved that at that time, it's 5 years later, it's likely that federal support for healthcare spending in this country is probably somewhere up, over $3 trillion. But if we were to save 50% over what total expenditures now, the federal share would fall to roughly $2 trillion. And of course, the feds would be covering it all. Greg left his Twitter link there. So you've got that. Okay, medical debt as of $195 billion as of March 2019. 22. Thank you, Sandy. I don't know if Greg but caught that. Case it's sad, Sandy. So that's going to end it for us. Okay, I urge everybody to leave and go over to Greg's stream, okay, at this time, which is on the Evolution channel on YouTube. I'm going over there myself. If you hang on a second, I should be able to give you the link to that. Still looking for that link. Here we go. I got that. Okay, so here's the link. And with that, I'm going to be signing off to go over to Greg's. There we go. Hopefully that works. And I'll see you later. I got to end the broadcast.